Hi, this is Dan Behringer back at you once again, continuing our series on the introduction to Agile concepts. In this session, we're going to talk about roles. And just by review, just remember session 1, we talked about Agile, what's the big deal? Then we covered the mindset, the core values, the principles, followed that up with a description of the Scrum, the centerpiece of the Agile activity. Next, in this session, we're going to talk about roles, and we'll follow that up with Agile planning. But as I mentioned, we're going to focus on roles here. If you haven't viewed the previous sessions, it's probably a good idea to review those before you get too far into this one. Also, by way of review, keep in mind that Agile, it's more than a life cycle, although it's primarily adopted within software development projects. There are many people who would say, we're Agile as well. But predominantly it's been adopted by software development projects and expanding in its utility across other endeavors as well. It draws on the need for a variety of perspectives, and as we talked about, characterized by teams that are self-organizing, self-directing, self-correcting, self-recognizing, and that transparency enables inspection, so we can view what we're doing to see what's working well, what's not working so well, so that we can then adapt. The whole idea is to adjust, become flexible, become agile, as it were. Now, as we mentioned, the Scrum is the centerpiece of the activity within the Agile organization. Let's take a look at the Scrum team. Now, this is as it's defined by the Scrum Guide, which is referenced throughout this material. First of all, we have the developer. This is the person producing usable software or usable product, I should say. In addition, we have the product owner and also a role called the Scrum Master. Let's take a look at each one of these a little bit more in depth. First of all, the developer role and responsibility primarily is around creating any usable part of the sprint objectives, sprint items. This could be product, could be research, could be testing. Any outcome that is expected from the sprint, the developer is delivering. So what they're going to apply their skills towards is they're going to take their expertise and help build the plan for the sprint. We talked about within the Scrum, the first day being that planning day in which you select the user stories to be completed in that sprint and create the sprint backlog. Also, they are going to make sure quality is baked into everything that's delivered by the creation of what's called a definition of done. That's criteria that the team comes up with and applies universally to all product to ensure that they're delivering quality product, services, or results. They're also adjusting and adapting each day to make sure that we keep the sprint goal in focus. What are we trying to accomplish in this sprint, and how can I fit within that framework to make sure the goal is being achieved? And self-directing, this is it's self-correcting as well. This is really about making sure that everyone is being held accountable, and that's best done by not just one person focusing on accountability, but everyone focusing together on mutually supportive accountability across the team. The next role is the product owner. The product owner roles and responsibility is primarily focused on making sure that they are maximizing the value of the product. They're getting the most out of the product. And what we mean by the value of the product is value is in the eye of the customer. The customer is getting something that they can use. Not only can they use it, but they are also very happy and satisfied with what they're using. So they're going to provide that primary interface between the Scrum team and the customer to help organize that. So what are they going to apply their skills to? Well, they're going to develop and communicate the product goal, In other words, they're aligned with that product vision, that product roadmap that we talked about is kind of not necessarily part of the Scrum, but it's all of the kind of upfront vision setting for the product itself. So they're aligned with that, and they're communicating that vision to the team as well as to the stakeholders. They're creating and communicating product backlog items. So in other words, those things that the team is reviewing each planning day of the sprint in the product backlog has already been organized by customer value. In other words, the prioritization of what the customer would like to see. And they're also making sure that priority is maintained. If something is not accepted at the end of a sprint, for example, that item simply goes back into the backlog. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is the next priority to work on. It should be reviewed relative to all of the priorities the customer has. So the backlog is a very dynamic document, which always should reflect the highest value priorities of the customer as well as the technical dependencies. And in order to do that, they make sure that the backlog is transparent, it's visible, and it's understood, not by the, or I should say, not just by the team, but also by the customer, that interface as we discussed. The next role is the Scrum Master role. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Scrum Master because this gets more treatment, I guess you would say, within the Scrum Guide of what this role actually involves. This is not a project manager. This is a facilitator that they are making sure that Scrum is operating per the Scrum Guide. That's their primary focus. They do that by being a servant leader. Now, within the Scrum Alliance certification portfolio, you have, certified product owner and certified Scrum Master. So those two roles have some training involved and some expectations that can be, confirmed through a certification, if you will, in order to make sure they're operating completely as per the expectations. Now, having said that, I want to be clear. The Scrum Master is not a project manager. The Scrum Master's focus is on the Scrum. Now, some of the characteristics that the Scrum Master has may be shared with what we normally think of as project management characteristics, but to be clear, within the Scrum, there is no project manager role. Why? Well, there is a tendency for project managers to, once they see the work that needs to be completed, they want to direct that work. The team is self-directing. And so if we are project managers within the Scrum environment, we're going to take on a different role. We'll talk a lot more about that when we go through the PMP exam prep course. What do the Scrum Master apply their skills to? Well, they're going to serve the Scrum team, they're going to serve the product owner, and they are going to serve the organization. And you can look at the Scrum Guide to see a greater level of granularity in the detail of how they go about serving those, but that's primarily what the Scrum Master is going to do. The Scrum Master is not a position, it is a role. As a matter of fact, there are some teams that rotate the Scrum Master role amongst the team members so that everyone can have a chance to facilitate. So they all share that responsibility. And they primarily work to make sure the team can focus on their responsibilities, which means first and foremost, they're going to remove blockers to work. These are called impediments, things that keep us from moving forward. We're going to talk about that in the daily stand-up. Scrum Master takes a list of those blockers and goes to work on those right away to make sure people can proceed with their work as expected. They also manage the reporting of the team's progress. The velocity and things like that, they're terms that are associated with the effectiveness and efficiency of the Scrum. They're reporting that through what we call information radiators. These are reports that you can view self-serve. Anyone outside the project team or anyone inside the project team can self-serve their own information needs by viewing reports that are posted in well-trafficked areas so that the team does not need to be interrupted for things like status. And the other thing is they coach. They coach the team on the Scrum practices. That's a key aspect. The Scrum Master knows how the Scrum should operate. Now, as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's Agile, and then within PMI, that we also have within our fold Disciplined Agile. The thing about the Scrum is the Scrum is focused on, kind of that team aspect, but that team needs to be able to operate within a larger enterprise environment. It's one of the reasons why Disciplined Agile is becoming much more recognized as a way to transform your organizations to work more effectively and more efficiently using Agile and Lean techniques through a number of different life cycles. So let's talk about how we define roles within Disciplined Agile. What's common between Disciplined Agile and the Scrum is that we see the product owner, the team lead, and the developer, which in Disciplined Agile is called the team member. These are the same equivalents as we would see within the Scrum. However, we also describe an architecture owner. This is someone who speaks for the technical viability and the technological viability of what the team is trying to accomplish. This is where, again, it begins to take on the aspect of how does what this team is delivering actually fit within the larger enterprise framework. We also include the stakeholder. The stakeholder we consider to be part of the team. They're not necessarily part of the core team that is delivering the product, service, and result, but we do want to consider them as one of the primary roles so that we can make sure that they're brought into the discussion, right time, right place with the right information needs. Now, one of the things you may have noticed if you've been running Scrum is that oftentimes you will need expertise that the team can't provide. And that you don't need that expertise for a period of time which would warrant having them assigned directly to the team. Therefore, we also want to describe some roles that can be leveraged to help the team be effective, but aren't necessarily part of the Scrum per se. And that includes roles such as the specialist, someone who has expertise knowledge in something the team is trying to tackle. Maybe there's questions that need to be answered, just a little bit of information or a little bit of help along the way. Also, independent testers. These are people that come from maybe quality assurance or quality control that come in and look at the overall deliverables and how that fits from an enterprise perspective. Domain experts, people have knowledge in how that domain or that business functional area or the technological functional area should work. Technical experts that oftentimes provide the support for the deliverables once the team is completed and is transitioned, but also can give very expert input at the right time. One of the things that comes to my mind is oftentimes we make changes within the Scrum that require some changes at the database level. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a DBA 100% assigned to the team, because most often DBAs, database administrators, are spread very thin across all kinds of different efforts. But you need them for a period of time to either make some changes, implement something, or if your database changes are of the large enough scale, large enough impact, you will probably want to make them a team member, okay? And integrator as well, someone who makes sure that everything is working across all of the systems, the interfaces, and all those sorts of things. Now, you're like, oh, wow, These are also a lot of roles, a lot of people, and we call these supporting roles. Now, keep in mind that not necessarily are we talking about a person separately for each one of these roles, an individual person for each one of these roles. Any number of people can put on more than one hat, more than one role, depending on what is needed at the time. What's really important is that the organization, and I believe this is something that still resides within project management, is to clarify roles and responsibilities to make sure that everyone is contributing either in a primary way or in a supporting way in the project environment. Okay, so that's your Disciplined Agile roles. Next, we're going to talk about Agile planning. I look forward to talking to you in the next segment. You can always find us at projectsbydesign.net. We'll see you in the next session.